Sweat stung Aurora's eyes as she drove her palms into the dying man's chest. The monitor screamed a relentless flatline. "Push one of epi!" she roared, ignoring the indignant gasp of the hospital's CEO standing just feet away. He didn't see a fading life. He only saw a PR disaster. Oakbridge General Hospital in downtown Seattle was notorious for its grueling Friday night shifts, but trauma nurse Aurora Jenkins thrived in the chaos. With 7 years of emergency room experience under her belt, Aurora had seen it all, from multi-car pileups on Interstate 5 to the grim realities of inner-city violence. She was a single mother to a 6-year-old boy, Leo, and her job was her lifeline. But more importantly, Aurora was a nurse who operated on instinct, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to the oath she had taken. It was 11:45 p.m. Aurora was 15 minutes away from clocking out of a brutal 14-hour shift. Her scrubs were stained with iodine and coffee, her dark hair haphazardly pinned up, and her joints ached with a dull, rhythmic throb. She was just finalizing a chart at the nurse's station when the double doors of the ambulance bay blew open. "We need a team now!" shouted paramedic Miller, rushing a gurney into Trauma Bay 1. John Doe, mid-30s, found unresponsive in the alley behind Pike Place. No pulse, no respiration. Downtime is estimated at 6 minutes. We've pushed 2 rounds of epinephrine in the rig, but we're still in V-fib. Aurora sprinted to the bay, snapping a pair of nitrile gloves onto her hands. "Transfer on my count," she ordered the team. 1, 2, 3. They hoisted the heavy, muscular man onto the hospital bed. Aurora immediately noted his physical condition. He wasn't a typical transient. Despite the dirt and the tattered, weather-beaten leather jacket, the man was in peak physical condition. His arms were corded with thick muscle, his hands heavily calloused, and a heavy, matte black tactical watch was strapped tightly to his left wrist. "Starting compressions," Aurora announced, climbing onto the step stool beside the bed to get the proper leverage over his massive chest. She locked her elbows and began the grueling, physically demanding rhythm of CPR. Staying alive, staying alive. She counted the beats in her head, putting her entire upper body weight into each thrust. "Charge the paddles to 200, yelled Dr. Eris Thorne, the exhausted attending physician who had just rushed into the room. "Clear." The man's body jolted violently as the electrical current ripped through him. Aurora's eyes darted to the monitor. Nothing. Still a jagged, chaotic line of ventricular fibrillation. "Resume compressions," Dr. Thorne commanded. Aurora was back on the chest, instantly. Crack. The sickening, sharp sound of a rib breaking echoed in the trauma bay. It was a standard, almost inevitable complication of effective CPR, especially on a broad-chested man, but it always sent a shiver down the spine of anyone unaccustomed to real-life trauma care. Unfortunately, someone utterly unaccustomed to trauma care had just walked into the emergency department. Richard Sterling, the newly appointed chief executive officer of Oakbridge General, was a man who viewed healthcare purely through the lens of profit margins, liability, and optics. A former hedge fund manager brought in to streamline the hospital's financial bleed, Sterling wore a bespoke 3-piece suit that cost more than Aurora's monthly rent. Tonight, Sterling was leading a late-night VIP tour. Trailing behind him were 3 high-net-worth investors from a private equity firm, including the formidable Harrison Caldwell. Sterling was trying to secure a $50 million grant to build a new luxury recovery wing, and he was eager to show off the smooth corporate efficiency of his emergency department. And here, Gentlemen, you can see our state-of-the-art triage center, where we maintain the highest standards of... Sterling's voice faltered as the group rounded the corner and stopped dead outside the glass walls of Trauma Bay 1. Inside, it was a scene of controlled violence. Blood from an unseen laceration on the patient's head had smeared across the pristine white sheets. Medical wrappers littered the floor. And there was Aurora, sweat dripping from her chin, aggressively pumping the chest of the John Doe, the sound of cartilage cracking under her palms. Caldwell, the lead investor, visibly blanched and took a step back, pressing a handkerchief to his mouth. Good God, Sterling, what is she doing to that poor man? It looks like a slaughterhouse. Sterling's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. His perfect tour, his multi-million-dollar pitch, was being ruined by this messy, visceral display of reality. He didn't see a medical team fighting for a life. He saw a massive liability and a PR nightmare unfolding right in front of his primary benefactors. Without thinking, Sterling pushed through the sliding glass doors of the trauma bay, his tailored Italian shoes stepping squarely into a discarded bloody gauze pad. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling barked, his voice cutting through the frantic beeping of the monitors. "Dr. Thorne, why is this chaos happening in plain view?" "Mr. Sterling, we have a code blue," Dr. Thorne snapped, not looking away from the monitor. "Please step outside." Sterling ignored the doctor and zeroed in on Aurora, who had not broken her rhythm. "You, nurse, stop that immediately. You are breaking the man's bones. You're opening us up to a massive malpractice lawsuit." Aurora briefly locked eyes with the CEO. "He has no pulse, sir. If I stop, he dies." She pushed down again. Crack. "I said stop," Sterling yelled, taking a step toward her. "I attended a seminar on minimized impact resuscitation. You are being overly aggressive. You look like a barbarian. Step away from the patient and let the automated chest compression machine do the work." "The Lucas device is broken," Aurora shot back, her breath hitching with exertion. "And your seminar didn't teach you that broken ribs are better than being dead. Please, get out of my way." Sterling was completely unaccustomed to being spoken to in this manner, let alone by a subordinate in front of multi-million-dollar investors. His ego flared, instantly overriding whatever small amount of common sense he possessed. "I am the CEO of this hospital," Sterling roared, "and I am giving you a direct order to step down from that stool and leave this room. You are creating a horrific spectacle for our guests." "Pulse check," Dr. Thorne yelled, trying to drown out the CEO. Aurora pulled her hands back. The room fell dead silent. The monitor drew a long, agonizingly straight line. A systole, flat line. "Nothing," Aurora said, her voice tight. Pushing another milligram of epi, commencing compressions. Before she could bring her hands down, Sterling reached out and grabbed Aurora's shoulder, forcefully yanking her backward. Aurora stumbled off the step stool, her boots slipping on the slick linoleum floor. She caught herself on the edge of a stainless steel counter, knocking over a tray of sterile instruments that crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter. "What is wrong with you?" Aurora screamed, the adrenaline and sheer protective instinct for her patient overriding any fear for her job. "He is dying." "You are out of control, Nurse Jenkins," Sterling sneered, adjusting his silk tie as if he had just swatted a fly. He turned to the security guard, Officer Higgins, who had run over at the sound of the commotion. "Officer, remove this woman from my hospital. She is a liability to this institution." "Mr. Sterling, respectfully, she is saving his life," Dr. Thorne interjected, stepping between the CEO and the nurse. We don't have time for this. Aurora, get back on the chest. Aurora lunged forward, but Higgins, looking incredibly apologetic, caught her arm. I'm sorry, Aurora. He's the boss. Let go of me, Higgins. Every second he goes without oxygen to the brain, we lose him. Aurora ripped her arm out of the guard's grasp and shoved past Sterling, nearly knocking the CEO into the glass partition. She scrambled back onto the stool and slammed her hands onto the John Doe's sternum. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is it, Sterling bellowed, his face practically purple. He pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at Aurora. You're fired, nurse. Do you hear me? You are terminated, effective immediately. I will see to it that your nursing license is revoked for gross insubordination and medical battery. The investors outside the glass were whispering furiously to one another. Harrison Caldwell looked disgusted, though whether it was at the bloody scene or the CEO's unhinged behavior was unclear. Fire me tomorrow, Aurora yelled, tears of frustration mixing with the sweat on her face. But tonight, I am saving this man. Charge to 300, Dr. Thorne ordered, realizing Aurora was not going to back down. Clear, Aurora threw her hands up. The shock hit the man's body. They all stared at the monitor. The jagged line bounced, spiked, and then fell into a slow, steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. We have a pulse, Dr. Thorne whispered, leaning over the man with a stethoscope. It's thready, but it's there. Pressure is 80/50. He's got spontaneous circulation. We did it. Aurora, you did it. Aurora slumped against the wall, her chest heaving. Her arms felt like lead, and her hands were trembling violently. She looked down at the bruised, broken chest of the stranger. He was alive. Against all odds, the John Doe was going to make it to the ICU. Sterling, however, was not moved by the medical miracle that had just occurred. He brushed off his jacket, shooting Aurora a look of pure venom. Officer Higgins, Sterling said coldly, escort Ms. Jenkins to her locker to collect her personal effects, and then walk her off the premises. Her badge is deactivated. If she sets foot on Oak Bridge property again, have her arrested for trespassing. A heavy silence fell over Trauma Bay 1. Dr. Thorne ripped off his surgical cap, his face a mask of disbelief. Richard, you cannot be serious. She just brought a man back from the dead. She followed standard ACLS protocols to the letter. She assaulted a patient, destroyed hospital property, and humiliated me in front of Vanguard Capital, Sterling replied, his voice devoid of emotion. She is a liability. The decision is final. Aurora felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. Fired. Fired for doing her job. How was she going to pay her rent? How was she going to pay for Leo's school? The reality of her situation came crashing down, extinguishing the brief high of saving a life. She looked at the unconscious man on the bed. His face was pale, his breathing assisted by a bag valve mask, but he was alive. Aurora took a shaky breath, untied her blood-stained gown, and threw it into the biohazard bin. It's fine, Dr. Thorne, Aurora said, her voice terrifyingly calm. I don't want to work for a man who puts a dollar sign on a human life anyway. She walked past Sterling, not giving him a second glance, and let Officer Higgins lead her down the hallway. Behind her, the trauma team began the quiet, urgent work of prepping the John Doe for transport to the intensive care unit. As the team moved the patient, Nurse Sarah, Aurora's best friend and colleague, began bagging his ruined clothes. As she picked up the shredded, blood-soaked leather jacket, something heavy clattered against the metal side of the gurney. Sarah paused, reaching into the torn lining of the jacket. She pulled out a thick silver chain. Dangling from the end were two metallic dog tags, worn smooth at the edges from years of friction. Sarah squinted at the stamped metal under the harsh fluorescent lights. Vance, Marcus J., O positive, U.S. Navy, Spec War. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at the rugged, battered man they had nearly lost. John Doe wasn't a transient. He was a United States Navy SEAL. And judging by the intricate, heavily classified tactical communication device they had just discovered strapped to his ankle underneath his boot, he wasn't just on leave. He was active duty. "Dr. Thorne," Sarah whispered, holding up the dog tags. "You need to see this. I think Mr. Sterling just fired the nurse who saved a very, very important man." Outside in the parking lot, the freezing Seattle rain began to fall. Aurora zipped up her thin fleece jacket, clutching a cardboard box holding her favorite coffee mug, a framed picture of her son Leo, and a stethoscope her late mother had gifted her. She looked back at the glowing emergency room sign, a place she had called home for nearly a decade. A tear finally escaped, sliding down her cheek to mix with the rain. She had won the battle for her patient, but she had lost the war for her livelihood. What Aurora didn't know, as she started her beat-up Honda Civic and drove into the dark, was that the storm hadn't even begun to hit Oakbridge General. The man lying in the ICU wasn't just any Navy SEAL. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Vance was a legend in the special warfare community, and the men he served with did not take kindly to civilians playing God with their own, and they were already on their way. To be continued. Morning sunlight fought a losing battle against the heavy Seattle rain as it crept through the blinds of Aurora's cramped two-bedroom apartment. She sat at her faded Formica kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee clutched in her hands, staring blankly at the eviction warning she had received 3 days prior. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat drowning out the sound of the morning cartoons playing in the living room. Her 6-year-old son, Leo, padded into the kitchen, his Spider-Man pajamas slightly too short at the ankles. He rubbed sleep from his eyes and crawled into her lap. "You're home early, Mommy. Usually you're sleeping when I wake up on Saturdays." Aurora forced a smile, kissing the top of his messy blonde head. "I finished my work a little early, sweetie. I thought we could spend the whole weekend together." She hugged him tightly, squeezing her eyes shut to stop the tears from falling. She had precisely $400 in her checking account. Rent was due in 6 days. She had sacrificed holidays, birthdays, and her own health for Oakbridge General, only to be discarded like a soiled pair of surgical gloves by a man who didn't know the difference between a pulse oximeter and a paperweight. Across town, the atmosphere at Oakbridge General Hospital was anything but quiet. The morning shift change was usually a controlled frenzy, but today, an icy tension gripped the intensive care unit. At 8:15 a.m., 2 matte black Chevrolet Suburbans screeched to a halt in the ambulance bay, completely ignoring the emergency vehicles only signage. Before the security guard could even step out of his booth, 4 men stepped out of the vehicles. They didn't wear uniforms, but their bearing screamed military. Dressed in civilian tactical gear, heavy denim, combat boots, and weather-resistant jackets, they moved with a synchronized predatory grace. Leading the pack was Commander Thomas Grinch Rollins. Standing 6'3" with a jawline carved from granite and eyes the color of a winter ocean, Rollins was a veteran of countless classified operations. He didn't ask for directions. He marched straight through the sliding glass doors, his men fanning out flawlessly around him, moving with absolute purpose. "Excuse me, gentlemen, you cannot just walk in here." Officer Higgins, the same guard who had escorted Aurora out the night before, stepped in front of the sweeping desk. Rollins didn't break stride. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick leather credential case, and held it an inch from Higgins's face. "Naval Special Warfare Group 2. We are here for Chief Petty Officer Marcus Vance. What floor?" Higgins swallowed hard, his hand dropping away from his radio. I see you. 4th floor. Take the service elevator on the left." By the time Sterling arrived at the hospital at 9 a.m., clutching a $4 macchiato and feeling immensely proud of how he had managed the crisis the night before, the hospital was buzzing with rumors. When he stepped off the elevator onto the 4th floor ICU, he was entirely unprepared for the sight of 2 heavily armed federal agents flanking the door to room 412. Sterling's bravado flared. He was the CEO. This was his domain. "What is the meaning of this? Who authorized armed personnel in my intensive care unit?" Commander Rollins stepped out of the room, slowly closing the door behind him. He looked Sterling up and down, taking in the designer suit, the perfectly coiffed hair, and the utter lack of calluses on his hands. "You must be Richard Sterling. I'm Commander Rollins. The man in that bed is my chief." Sterling's face instantly shifted into a mask of polished corporate sympathy. A Navy SEAL? This was a PR goldmine. "Commander, it is an absolute honor. I am the Chief Executive Officer here. Please, rest assured, your man is receiving the absolute pinnacle of medical care. Our world-class facility and my dedicated protocols undoubtedly saved his life last night. I personally oversaw the—" "Save the boardroom pitch, Sterling," Rollins interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, low and dangerous. "I've already spoken to the attending physician." Dr. Aris Thorne stepped out from the nurse's station, his face drawn and exhausted. He hadn't gone home. He had stayed through the night to monitor Vance. "Dr. Thorne tells me a very different story," Rollins continued, taking a slow step toward the CEO. "He tells me my chief was flatlining. He tells me a trauma nurse physically kept Marcus's heart pumping while you stood in the doorway and yelled at her about liability." Sterling flushed. "Now hold on. That nurse was acting recklessly. She fractured his ribs. She was violating our minimized impact policies and embarrassing this institution in front of Vanguard Capital investors. I had to take decisive administrative action." "You fired her," Rollins stated, the words sounding less like a question and more like a verdict. "I terminated her employment, yes," Sterling countered, trying to stand taller. "It was a necessary executive decision to protect the hospital." Rollins leaned in close. The scent of ozone and stale coffee clung to the commander. "Marcus Vance has survived 2 IED blasts, a helicopter crash in the Hindu Kush, and a bullet to the chest in Fallujah. He survives because he refuses to quit, and because the people around him refuse to quit on him. That nurse, Aurora Jenkins, cracked his chest because she was fighting death with her bare hands. She did exactly what I would have done. She did what any operator would have done." Sterling scoffed nervously. "Be that as it may, hospital policy didn't save my man. Aurora Jenkins did," Rollins snapped. He turned his head slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, are you hearing this?" Sterling froze. From the waiting area around the corner, Harrison Caldwell, the lead investor from Vanguard Capital, slowly walked into view. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, but he walked with a distinct, rigid posture that Sterling had never really noticed before. "Loud and clear, Commander," Caldwell said, his eyes fixed on Sterling with absolute disgust. "Harrison, what are you doing here?" Sterling stammered, the macchiato suddenly feeling very hot in his hand. "We had a lunch meeting scheduled for noon to finalize the $50 million expansion grant." Caldwell stopped next to the Navy SEAL. "There will be no lunch, Richard, and there will be no grant." Sterling's jaw dropped. "Harrison, be reasonable. Last night was an anomaly. I handled the rogue employee. You saw me take control of the situation." "I saw a coward," Caldwell said quietly, the insult hitting like a physical blow. "I saw a man who cared more about my checkbook than a dying man on a gurney. I saw a brilliant, dedicated nurse sacrifice her career to save a life, while you whined about optics." Caldwell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, faded lapel pin, fastening it to his lapel. It was the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. "You didn't do your background research on your investors, did you, Richard?" Caldwell asked softly. "I served in the 1st Marine Division. I spent a year in Helmand Province. I know what it looks like when someone is fighting for a brother's life. Vanguard Capital heavily prioritizes investments in veteran health care and institutions with integrity. You possess neither. Harrison, please, we can restructure the board. I've already called an emergency board of directors meeting for 8 o'clock tonight," Caldwell interrupted coldly. "As Vanguard holds a controlling minority stake in Oak Bridge's debt, I am legally within my rights to demand a vote of no confidence. You are finished here, Sterling. Pack your office." At 4 p.m., a heavy knock startled Aurora. She had spent the last 4 hours staring blankly at her laptop, mechanically updating her resume. The bleak reality of the local job market was sinking in, and the eviction warning sitting on her kitchen counter felt like a ticking time bomb. She pulled her oversized cardigan tight around her shoulders, wiped her exhausted eyes, and cracked the door open. She gasped, instinctively taking a half-step back. Filling her tiny apartment hallway was Commander Rollins, looking like a mountain in a trench coat. Beside him stood Dr. Thorne, offering a tired but genuine smile, and Harrison Caldwell, the imposing investor from Vanguard Capital she had seen the night before. "Aurora Jenkins?" Rollins asked, his deep voice softening slightly. Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs. Had Sterling pressed charges? Were the police on their way? "Yes," she whispered. Rollins reached out a massive scarred hand. "I'm Commander Thomas Rollins. I'm Marcus Vance's commanding officer, the man you saved last night." Aurora stared at his hand for a second before cautiously taking it. Her immediate thought wasn't of her ruined career, but of her patient. Is he okay?" Dr. Thorne stepped forward. "He woke up 2 hours ago, Aurora. He's breathing on his own. His neurological function is completely intact. It's an absolute miracle. Because you refused to stop compressions, his brain wasn't deprived of oxygen. You saved his life." A profound wave of relief washed over Aurora. Her knees went weak, and she leaned against the doorframe, letting out a breath she felt she had been holding for 18 hours. "Thank God. He was so strong." "He is strong," Rollins agreed. "But he wouldn't be here without you. I came here to personally thank you on behalf of Naval Special Warfare. You possess a courage under fire that I rarely see outside of a combat zone." "Thank you, Commander," Aurora whispered, looking down at her scuffed slippers. "But it cost me everything. I don't know how I'm going to take care of my little boy." Harrison Caldwell stepped forward, his expression solemn but remarkably kind. "Ms. Jenkins, I represent Vanguard Capital. I witnessed the entirety of the events last night. What Richard Sterling did to you was an atrocity. He is a disgrace to the medical management profession." Aurora braced herself. "Which is why," Caldwell continued, "as of 30 minutes ago, the Oakbridge Board of Directors voted unanimously to terminate his contract. He is gone." Aurora's head snapped up. "What? Furthermore," Caldwell smiled warmly, "Vanguard Capital is proceeding with a $75 million investment into Oakbridge General's trauma wing. However, my stipulations were very specific. Part of that funding requires the immediate reinstatement of the nurse who proved she is the beating heart of that hospital." Dr. Thorne chuckled, pulling a thick envelope from his coat. "The board wants you back, Aurora, but not just as a trauma nurse. The position of Director of Emergency Nursing has been vacant for 6 months. With your field experience and your unyielding dedication to your patients, we want you to run the floor. Full benefits, a massive salary increase, and full funding for your staff." Aurora stared at the envelope, her vision blurring with fresh tears. It was completely surreal. 12 hours ago, she was destroyed. Now, she was being handed the keys to the kingdom. "Say yes," Rollins urged softly, "because Marcus wants to meet the woman who hits harder than a Taliban insurgent." 3 days later, Aurora walked the halls of Oakbridge General in a crisp white lab coat bearing her new title, Aurora Jenkins, RN, Director of Emergency Nursing. Sterling's former corner office was currently being gutted to make room for a new triage planning center. She walked into the ICU, nodding to the specialized security detail posted outside room 412. They stepped aside instantly, opening the door for her. Marcus Vance was sitting up in bed. He looked battered, his chest heavily wrapped, but his dark eyes were sharp and focused. As Aurora entered, a slight smile touched his face. "So," Marcus rasped, his voice deep and rough, "you're the mechanic who broke my chassis." Aurora smiled, checking his monitors out of pure habit. "Your chassis was a little stiff, Chief. I had to apply some percussive maintenance to get the engine running again." Marcus laughed, wincing slightly as he clutched his bruised ribs. He reached out, his heavy hand gently wrapping around Aurora's wrist. The humor faded from his eyes, replaced by a piercing sincerity. "My commander told me what happened. You didn't know me. You didn't know what I did. But you threw away your livelihood to keep pushing on my chest." "You were my patient," Aurora replied softly, placing her hand over his. "That's all I needed to know." "I've had men die for me," Marcus said quietly, "but I have never had a total stranger sacrifice their own life to save mine. I owe you a debt I can never repay, Aurora." "Just heal," Aurora smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Go back to your team and try to stay out of alleys." As Aurora walked out into the Seattle sunshine, the heavy rain from the past few days had finally broken. She pulled out her phone, dialing her babysitter. "Hey, it's Aurora. Tell Leo to get his shoes on. We're going out for the biggest ice cream sundae in the city." "Yeah, Mommy got a promotion." Aurora's story proves that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, ultimately pays off. True heroes don't wear suits. They wear scrubs and dog tags. If this story of justice and medical bravery inspired you, please hit that like button, Share this video with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more incredible, real-life stories of everyday heroes standing their ground.